A man walks into the doctor's office with his hand over his eye and says, "Doctor, doctor, you have to help me. Whenever I drink coffee, I get a terrible pain in my right eye." The doctor replies, "Try taking the spoon out of your cup." I'll let you think about that for a second. Did you get it? Interpreting short stories is a lot like getting the punchline of a joke. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to think it's funny, but you should still get the joke. That's your job as a discerning reader. Just in case you didn't get the joke, see, he drinks the cup of coffee and he still has the spoon there, and then the spoon hits him in the eye. So that's why the doctor thinks he's getting a sore eye. Of course, that's ridiculous. That's not happening. But, anyways, that's why it's funny. Okay, what should you look for in order to understand a story? There are many paths to getting or understanding a short story, but they invariably involve one or more of the elements of fiction. Here comes the elements of fiction. So now we have plot. Maybe you already know what plot means, or you think you know what plot means, but it is actually a very specific thing when we analyze fiction. So let's take a look. Significant events in a story. And I would underline the word significant. Is not everything that happens in the story, not everything is plot. It's only the significant events that in the story that are considered plot. The second element is character. Hopefully, you know what character is. You might be thinking about it. We're going to actually look at character in two ways. But the first definition is this one, basically, the people in the story. But we will actually focus not so much on the people as the development of those people, how they are portrayed in the story. The third element is setting. Setting you might think of as place, but really it's the time, the place, and the atmosphere. Many people just write about, oh, well, it takes place in Vancouver, but that's not enough. We need to know when, in the past, present, or future, and also the atmosphere that's created by that setting. The fourth element of fiction is style. Now, this is kind of a nebulous word, but we're going to use a whole bunch of other words to help us define what style of a writing style truly is. So, but we're going to say for now that this is the language and literary techniques that the author uses to write his story. The way I tell a story might be entirely different from the way you tell a story. Could be the same story, but we just tell it differently. That difference is called style. Now, the fifth element of fiction is theme. You probably heard the word before, but again, in literature, it has a very definite meaning. We call it the message about life, the message about life that the story teaches. Not all stories, I wouldn't say that they don't have a theme, but not all stories, the theme is that important. But many stories, and in fact, I'm probably going to say most stories, theme actually is very important to the story. And in some stories, it's the entire purpose of the story. Okay, those are the five basic elements of fiction, but they all are related to something else as well. All stories revolve around a conflict. On your notes, right beside it, you can put problem. That's basically what a conflict is. If there is no conflict in a story, it's a person looking at flowers in a field. It's not a story. Yeah, it's not a story. It's not a story until there is actually some kind of problem, maybe a bee comes along, that the main character needs to overcome. There are three kinds of conflict. The first one is person versus person. If a person is in the field and then another bad person comes along, that would be a person versus person conflict. Person versus environment. Say that same person is in the field all by themselves, but then the bee comes along and stings them. That would be a person versus environment conflict. There's no other person, he's all by himself. There's a third kind of conflict: person versus himself or herself. This one, it may seem that this person is all by themselves, but they have something that bothers them. Maybe they're trying to overcome some problem in their own character, or maybe it's just their view of the world that troubles them. This is called a person versus himself or herself conflict. A conflict can be external or internal. A person versus person conflict, do you think that is external or internal? If you guessed external, you are correct. Pat yourself on the back. A person versus environment conflict, do you think that is external or internal? External as well. The bee stings you on the nose. That bee is outside of yourself. So it's an external conflict. Person versus himself or herself. Do you think this is an internal or external conflict? Internal. You got it right. That's because the himself, your herself, that person is inside you and you're having a conflict with a person inside yourself. Yeah, with your own self. So we call that an internal conflict. Now, all of this doesn't really make sense unless you identify who the protagonist or the main character of the story is. A story can have more than one conflict, but the main conflict should revolve around the main character or protagonist of the story. I guess you can guess who that person is in the picture.